Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. Oh, we're on episode 12 of My Hero Academia season 5. It's episode 100. How crazy, right? 100 episodes of My Hero Academia. I'll show you guys right here, but Horikoshi released this sketch on Twitter to celebrate the 100th episode, and I love Horikoshi's sketches. If you have a Twitter account, you should follow Horikoshi. He really only posts sketches that he does to celebrate the anime or to celebrate a new chapter of the manga coming out, and usually the sketches are not spoilery, so if you don't read the manga, you're not going to be spoiled, except maybe if a character appears that appears in the chapter. That's pretty much it. But otherwise, it's really, really cool to see his sketches, but I wanted to include this one because I love Todoroki and Bakugo in casual clothes. Bakugo rocking the Hawaiian print shirt with the little details, like his belt buckle has like an explosion on it. It's really cool little tiny details that Horikoshi includes, but also the giant Deku in the background that's like slowly rising up like Attack on Titan. I love it. I absolutely love it. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, 100 episodes. And fitting that this one is called The New Power and All for One. It's like a nice, I feel like this episode is going to be the end of Core 1, the halfway point of the season. I can't believe we're at the halfway point already. That's insane to me. The halfway point of season 1 going into the second core of season 5, I mean, and going into the second core of that. So that's pretty exciting. So we're basically wrapping up the last match where Deku and then beat Class 1B. Shinso, pretty much, his exam is over. These two battles were his license, his exam to get into the academy. And I'm assuming he's going to get in because it's Shinso and Aizawa ain't going to let him not get in. And then, yeah, All for One is mentioned in the title for this. And we've seen All for One creepily just being in the background, like talking about his brother and nostalgia and stuff. And it's like, ugh. So I'm very curious what all they're going to cover in this episode. I'm curious because we've got to kind of round out the plot for this half and make way for the next arc coming up, right? That seems to be the case. So I'm very curious to know what they're going to do this episode and how they're going to handle it. But as always, I'm going to watch the episode, go back, reread the chapters of the manga that cover this, and then come back and talk to y'all and do a non-spoiler and then a spoiler discussion. But I'm pretty excited, y'all. It is scorching hot today. My hair is it's like 80% humidity. Why not? But yeah, let's forget that and do episode 12 of season 5 of My Hero Academia here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Christmas in July? What's this you say? Oh. So this episode, man, this episode was really, really interesting, and I've got lots of things to talk about. But first, for non-spoilers, I really liked the conclusion of this. This episode was really like just fun all the way throughout. It was just a nice little jaunt into some good things. I'm so glad for Bakugo and Todoroki to have their license finally. Like that whole, I get that these two OP characters had to go through the extra steps to get their provisional license, and that was kind of, it makes sense in terms of the plot because Horikoshi, it was kind of smart on his part because when we had the overhaul arc, it was like Horikoshi the mangaka, he's like, how do I do this to where Deku is the only person to fight Overhaul? And yeah, Ochako, Night-Eye, Mirio, Tsuyu, all of them played a part in it, but Horikoshi, you could see the gears turning in his head, like, how can I keep, because Todoroki and Bakugo, as we've seen in this episode, are very competent heroes, and they get the job done. So Horikoshi's like, how do I get them out of this storyline to where they aren't involved? And that we can have characters like Kirishima and Deku and Ochako and Tsuyu go through all this growth. How do we do that? And his way of doing that was to have the two of them fail their licensing exam and have to go through all these supplementary classes. And that was really smart. It was a way of him getting them out of the plot. It made sense with the story, and it allowed Deku and the others to have a moment to kind of have some character growth. So that was really smart on Horikoshi's part. But I'm really glad that now everybody's on the same level. Everybody's on the same level. It's like, cool, awesome. We've all got, everybody's got their license now. We can all go through hero training. Everybody's on the same page. We finally got to that point. Good. But going through this episode, I did want to talk about a couple things. There's a lot of spoilers in this episode with this one. A lot of spoiler talk. And I have some things to talk to y'all in the spoiler corner. But for this episode, I didn't want to include a panel here from the manga. It's not a spoiler, but I really like... so finally getting to know what Monoma's blank actually is. Thank goodness it's a blank, because imagining Monoma 1 trying to have all of Deku's power, which really Aizawa doesn't know about the full extent of Deku's abilities. So yeah, if Monoma just blew apart, that would be really bad. So that's good. But also, I get why Aizawa wanted Monoma to copy Eri's quirk, because obviously they want to bring Mirio's quirk back, but also kind of use it to help her train. I get that. But her quirk is so OP too that I'm like, what if Monoma got it and it just like didn't work right and he like vanished and ugh. So I'm glad for Monoma's sake that he didn't get either of their quirks, because Deku and Eri's quirks, being stockpile quirks, are really, really OP. But also, I really like Monoma in this first part of the episode because you can totally see him putting on the facade. Like, he instantly puts on the mask and the over annoying crazy hype where he's like, we'll get all this going down and wait till next time. And then Aizawa's like, you need to go see Eri. And he's like, Like the mask instantly falls. And then when he sees Eri, of course, Mirio's told her back in the Culture Festival arc that Class 1B is the evil class. And she's like, it's evil of UA. And Monoma's like, what are you talking about? And I like that Monoma's just not very good with kids. He's too much. And then Deku has to kind of like bring things down. But I included this panel because we've had this talk. Now Bakugo's in the break room. Bakugo has joined the conversation with All Might and Deku. He's in on it too. I love it. I love the dynamic that Bakugo brings to it. But Bakugo is smart. Katsuki is a smart character. And he brings up a very good point. In that Deku, having these multiple quirks inside of him, is very much like All for One. Very much like All for One. There's a big parallel there in that, All for One could use all these quirks and stockpiled them all together. You can too now, so doesn't that make you a lot like him? There's a big parallel with them, and it's like, ooh. And I like this panel that I've included up here, because as he's talking to Eri, because she's doubting her power, she's like, oh, my powers are a curse. And Deku's like, no, they're not. He's like, your powers saved me. And I love that black bubble where Bakugo's words, that this makes you the same as him. And Deku's like, no, this power will be my ally. I'm going to make it my own someday. And so again, it's tying back, because Todoroki confronted Deku being like, oh, you have two quirks too. And Deku's like, no, that's not it. Don't get the secret love child conspiracy theories going. But I like that it's a nice parallel to when Deku told Todoroki, he's like, no, your power is your own. You make it whatever you want to. This is all, his own words are coming back to him like, yeah, your powers may make you, in theory, like All for One, but you're not him. You can make these powers your own and use them to do good. And so Deku's kind of like, that's his own self-assurance, and he's like, yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to use my powers for good. And I'll master one for all. And it's like, I love it. And I love that he just comforts Eri. And I like the little knife chopping metaphor that he uses. He's like, knives are dangerous, but they also can be used for good. It's like, that's a really good metaphor for a kid, to let them know that her power isn't a burden. It's very helpful. She just needs to learn to control it properly and use it right. Like, that's really sweet. And that's really good. I love that Aizawa made basically a PowerPoint to show why Shinso should be in the hero training course. Like, he had it all ready to go. He's like, here we go. You guys, I won't show you the panel, but if you get a chance to read the manga, it's just basically he has the PowerPoint pulled up and he's like, as you can see here, it's like, Aizawa is totally supportive of his foster child, Shinso, and I absolutely love it. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. But yeah, so I like that we get Class 1A and Class 1B. I like at the end of the day, they're all still classmates and they're all still friends and they all get to hang out together. Like, I love it. It's so wonderful. And I like the idea that, of them all hanging out and talking to one another. Kirishima just taking the shirt off and running into the snow. And poor Suyu, because she's a frog, she's hibernating. She's like, oh, the cold makes me tired. It's like, aw. But yeah, Bakugo and Todoroki getting their hero license, and then 30 minutes later, going on the scene. And I didn't save the panel, but there's a panel in the manga where All Might's trying to control the crowd. And he's like, back up. And there is a guy in the manga panel that's like, look, it's All Might. It's like, I love it. I love that in the face of danger, people are still starstruck by All Might. It's wonderful. And that I like that people know it's All Might now as the skeletal version of himself. Like, they totally get that it's him. And Bakugo, for all of his talk, for all of his aggravating talk, he still saves All Might. And he's like, go commit suicide somewhere else. Like, I love it. I love it. And Bakugo, I like this character change in Bakugo at this point in the series because it's very subtle, but it's very, very good that Bakugo's gone from someone that hated Deku, that wanted nothing to do with Deku, that was like, you're a nerd, I hate you, get away from me, and would avoid him at all costs. He's gone from that in season 1 and telling Deku to jump off a roof to, 1, joining in All Might and Deku's conversations in the break room, showing that he cares. 2, training with Deku to help him get Black Whip and master it. And 3, caring enough to train with Deku and save All Might. Like, Bakugo is slowly undergoing these character changes where he's slowly becoming a more compassionate person. Or he could have been compassionate all this time and just didn't show it at all. And now he's slowly showing it as the series goes on. And it's very small changes. It's very natural and gradual. But if you've watched this show for 5 seasons, you can definitely see the character development in Bakugo slowly developing. And I really like it. It really makes me like Bakugo as a character a lot. And it makes me root for him. And it's funny because his personality has not changed. He's still arrogant and still yelling at people. And then I like that when Sato makes the giant cake, he's like, no, that cake's too big. He takes a piece anyway. Like, he's not going to be rude and take it. It's so funny. I absolutely love it. I love the character. Horikoshi does a really good job of making consistent characters whose actions and dialogue match no matter what the situation. Like Ida running and doing the things, it matches his character perfectly, and he does that in this episode. I like how Mina instantly wanted to throw Mineta under the bus. She's like, they were like, which class is Shinso going to be in? And they're like, we haven't decided that yet. And Mina's like, punish Mineta, get him out of here. Let Shinso take his place, which I think most of the fandom would agree to happen. But and then the villain in this episode, the one that controlled carbonated water, I love Todoroki being so logical, being like, oh, the carbonated water, it goes flat with heat. And it's like, look at you, science major. Look at you. I like that he was like, oh, you guys are kids. And that he planned the whole, he's like, we've spent a month planning this entire, robbery. We've planned this for a month, and you kids come in after school to ruin our good time. And I love that Bakugo's like, you guys have had a month to plan, go get a job. Go to work. That was so wonderful. I love that Horikoshi in this dramatic situation includes so much situational and dialogue commentary that's hilarious. But yeah, the idea that Bakugo's like, I don't care if we're kids in high school, we're still going to kick your butt and save these people. And Bakugo, again, is very much like Endeavor, where he saved all the people and was trying to do as minimal damage as possible. And with Todoroki, that is kind of hard because his ice quirk is naturally going to be causing collateral damage. But he tries, But I love that. I love that Bakugo's like, no, we're going to stop the bad guys and save these people. And they end up doing it. And it's really good. And then this Slide and Go guy coming in. It's like, oh, I'm glad we have our current generation of heroes, because some of the ones that are in All Might's generation are a bit lame. And Slide and Go, he looks a little lame. So it's like, oh, good. Glad that Bakugo and Todoroki are part of the cool generation. But yeah, this was just a really, really good episode. Really, it was well paced throughout. I've got lots of spoilers to talk about. But I thought overall this was a nice episode to kind of round out the Class 1A versus Class 1B battles. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. If you know the spoilers that I'm about to talk about in the spoiler corner, please don't talk about them in the comments unless you do like a spoiler tag and then give some space so that manga-only people or anime-only people aren't spoiled. But if you just came here to listen to this part of it, I liked this episode. It was nice. I like seeing Class 1A and Class 1B in casual clothes, just hanging out and being friends. And then we cut to them actually doing hero work. And Todoroki, some growth to him, he didn't just leave his dad on read anymore. He actually reached out to Endeavor and said, I want to learn Flash Fire. And I love, like, Endeavor holding the villain back. He's like, oh my god, my son answered me. And the villain's like, take me away! There's a lot of funny moments in this episode that I really, really appreciated, and that was a good one too. That Endeavor's like, "Oh, my son got back to me," and the villain's like, "Just take me to jail." But yeah, I've got spoilers to talk about. But if you're not here for Spoiler Corner, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week for episode 13. If you're sticking around for Spoiler Corner, there are so many spoilers in this episode. Lots of foreshadowing, but also in the preview, at first I was highly confused, y'all. Highly confused in the preview, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But I've thought about it a little bit, and I think I know what they're trying to do. I think I know what they're doing. I'm not sure how I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm being optimistic, and I'm going to go through this with the most optimistic lens possible, because I don't think that they're going to skip over an entire arc. I don't think they're skipping over an entire arc. I'm sure that some of you, when you saw the preview, are like, wait, what are we doing? But I have a theory, and I'm going to talk about it. But first, I want to go through. So mainly this chapter dealt with, in the manga, the end of chapter 216, chapter 217, and then parts of chapter 218 and 219. Parts of it. And I'm going to explain that here in a second. Because I was confused reading the manga. I was like, wait, are we skipping all of this? I don't think we're skipping it, but I think that the anime is intentionally moving things around to make the pacing better. And if it goes this way, I'm going to be okay with it, but I'm also going to be like, wait, what? I think I have an idea of what they're doing, and I'm going to talk with y'all about it. So, bear with me. A couple things that are spoilery about this episode. First of all, they name drop Shirakumo. President Mike name dropped Shirakumo. I was like, we name dropped him. He's officially going to be in this sucker. Strap yourselves in. The question is, and I'm curious now, wondering how the hell they're doing this, because I think I know what they're doing. I think I have an idea of what they're doing, but I'm like, are we going to get Shirakumo this season? I don't think we are, but with them moving stuff around in the plot, I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I'm very curious what's going to happen with this. I'm very curious. Next episode is going to be a big determinant on where we're going with this story. But I think they're leaving Shirakumo for season 6. I think they just name dropped him now. Like, don't forget that name. It's going to come back up. But President Mike talking to Aizawa like, oh, Shinso's a lot like you, so Shirakumo. And Aizawa's like, we're not talking about him right now. And if you know from my last week's reaction in the spoiler corner, Shirakumo is the classmate and best friend of President Mike and Aizawa that died and ends up becoming a Nomu and becomes Kurogiri. So they're name dropping him now. So there's a lot of sprinklings of spoilers in this. So many sprinklings of little seeds being planted for later developments. So many seeds being planted. And I'm like, oh my gosh, show. Like, this episode is probably the most spoiler starting episode of the whole season so far. Like, there's so many things planted. And that was the first one. So Shirakumo gets planted. We get the name. We're going to build up the mystery to him. And I hope they include the Vigilante storyline and Aizawa's backstory. I hope they do. I don't know if they will or not. The next thing that we get is the whole break room talk with Bakugo and Deku and All Might. I still think that they're going to end this season going back to that conversation with the notebook where All Might researches the quirk users. I still think we're going to go back to that somehow and close out the season with that. I think that's what's going to happen, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm glad I got to talk a little bit about the All for One connection in the non-spoiler review, because man, if you're a Dad for One theorist, or like me and think that Deku is related to All for One somehow, even if I don't think he's the father, but I think that he's related, then this is definitely a tie to that. Because yeah, All for One started the One for All quirk, so it makes sense that Deku is the accumulation. Deku's the chosen one. He's the accumulation of all this. So it's going to be kind of like, we've not gotten to that point in the manga so far, but I think that if there is an actual confrontation with Deku and All for One, then it's going to be brought up how similar they are. And I like in that moment that Deku's like, no, I'm going to make this power my own and use it for good. And it's like, that theory is going to be tested throughout this manga, and it's being tested now with the manga. So I'm very curious what Horikoshi ends up doing with that. But Bakugo is on to the fact. Bakugo's the one that says it. All Might doesn't want to say it, but Bakugo's like, I don't care to mince words. He's like, yeah, Deku, you're kind of like All for One. It's like, kind of, a little bit. Okay, so I want to include this panel because it's just briefly shown in the anime, and I imagine that a lot of anime only reactors are not going to pay 2 seconds to this part of the episode. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, it's Detnerat. It's Redestro. Okay, Liberation Army, man, because chapter 218 is called the Meta Liberation Army, and this is the start of chapter 218, where we have the brief mention of Detnerat, the big player in the lifestyle industry who has entered the hero support sector. And there's little tiny brief. So before I get into where this episode is completely derailed from the manga a little bit, but I have a theory of why they're doing that. I will say, if you don't know who Detnerat is, they're a company that's like a hero support group that makes different items to be used by the public for like support. And so now they're getting into the hero support sector where they make gear for heroes to use to fight the villains. And we're getting into this whole thing that Overhaul started talking about, where Overhaul was talking about, we sell this to the heroes, we sell this to the villains, and we make a monopoly. Detnerat has basically done that. They sell equipment to both villains and heroes, and the heroes and villains use the equipment against each other, and it's like a war of who gets the best tech. And Detnerat's kind of the monopoly on it. And Detnerat's kind of like a vigilante V for Vendetta group that's like, they're basically against the Hero Commission, and they just want people with quirks to be able to do whatever they want and not have to get hero licenses, not have to do this. They basically want to just liberate those with meta abilities or quirks. So getting that little name drop here is very, very interesting, especially with what the episode does for the rest of it. But we get a little bit of another preview of Detnerat at the very end of this episode when Slide and Go pops in, and he's like, oh, well, that equipment was faulty that villain was using because he got it off the black market. It's faulty equipment. If you haven't read the manga, you don't know, but the hero, Slide and Go, is actually a member of the Meta Liberation Army. He's a member of Redestro's army. He's a hero. He's posing as a hero, but he actually is part of the Meta Liberation Army. So he's in on the secret that Detnerat is selling this equipment and kind of selling the high-end equipment to make the black market stuff look bad so that people will go buy Detnerat's equipment instead. So it's a big monopoly. And Slide and Go is kind of hinting at, man, if only that villain had had the actual support items, then he wouldn't have failed. So that's all very interesting too. But here's the thing. So I was reading the manga, and in chapter 218, we got that little preview on the screen, but then the manga completely delves into Redestro. And Redestro being the CEO, the now CEO of Detnerat. And we see here in the panel his kind of introduction. And there's a whole big spiel about him. Like, he's doing this commercial about helping people and heroes across the world. And it's a big commercial. And Redestro is such a interesting antagonist because he's a salesman. He's a salesman, but he's also the leader of this, like, Meta Liberation Army. So he's like a salesman and a mafia boss all tied into one. He's a very, very cool antagonist, and I really like him. But he's kind of the central point of the My Villain Academia arc. So we completely skip over his backstory from the manga in this episode. We completely skip over it and instead focus on Bakugo and Todoroki versus the villain. And so I think that that's intentional, and I'm okay with them doing that because I have a theory of what they're doing. Because this episode is very lighthearted and very fun, and it's a nice little rounding out of this whole season so far that's been pretty enjoyable and kind of like, oh, it's fun. It's like they're saving the dark stuff for later, you know, before they do the tone, they're easing into the tone shift, right? And in hindsight, watching the episode and then reading the manga, I'm like, okay, I get why they're pushing Redestro's side story and introduction to maybe the next episode or the episode after that because it's so dark and because things take an instant tone shift. Like Redestro instantly kills the CEO of Detnerat and takes over. It's like, boom, tone shift. We are doing this. And so I think that the animators didn't want to do that harsh tone shift in this episode because things were so lighthearted. Horikoshi doesn't care. One thing I love about Horikoshi is he is not making a manga to be adapted into an anime. He is just making a manga to tell a story. And I respect that about Horikoshi, and I love it. But it makes it a little hard for the animators because they're like, how do we do this? How do we adapt this? Because there's some harsh tone shifts in this episode in this manga chapter, and do we just harsh tone shift and then tone shift back, or what do we do? So I think they took the safe route, and they're like, we'll just include Bakugo and Todoroki's story where things are okay and it's still like, oh, it kind of connects to that lightheartedness, and then we're going to save that dark shift. So that they cut out Redestro's introduction in this episode. They cut it out from the manga, but I think they're saving it. They're going to do it later. I hope they do, because it's integral to the whole story. But I love this panel they did include. It was the end of chapter 218. I love how it was adapted in the anime. Bakugo just standing there with his head cocked like, oh yeah, 30 minutes since we became heroes? Who cares? We're still heroes. It's such a good panel, and I like that they adapted it. So chapter 219 goes back and forth between the Meta Liberation Army meeting with Redestro and Todoroki and Bakugo fighting these villains. And so I think that it was a wise choice on the anime's part to just focus on the Bakugo-Todoroki battle, and they're saving all this because we get the broker that works with Twice in the League of Villains. We get his introduction back into this series. Redestro kidnaps him and beats him up, trying to find out where Shigaraki is. We get all that, and I think they're saving it because that's going to be in the My Villain Academia part, right? So we really only get a couple of pages from chapters 218 and 219 that focus on Bakugo and Todoroki's battle with the villains. But I think the anime did it well. I'm just like, I don't think they're going to skip over Redestro's introduction. I don't think they're going to skip over Gigantomachia and the other ones because it's so important. But I think they're saving it to do all the dark stuff for the series later. So here's the curious thing. Y'all. In the preview, it shows that next episode's a Christmas chapter. And I was like, that happens pretty late in the manga, doesn't it? So here's the weird thing. When I first looked, right now we're on this episode went over chapters 216 to 219. The Christmas episode is chapter 242. After everything with the My Villain Academia arc is over. So I was like, why did we skip to the end of the My Villain Academia arc? We're not going to skip that whole arc, right? I don't think they are. I was panicking at first seeing that preview, like, why are we skipping over everything? But I don't think we're doing that. I think that the anime is, I'm going to put it up here on the screen, is following this logic. And this is my thoughts. I think that we are going to, next episode, go to the Christmas episode where things are still lighthearted and fun and happy. And because it's kind of weird in the manga. In the manga, the My Villain Academia arc happens, and then chapter 242 is the heroes finding out about the My Villain Academia arc. So it's kind of like after the fact, they find out about it, right? And it's a kind of a weird pacing thing in the manga. It's like, oh, okay, it was kind of like Horikoshi was rounding out that arc. And then chapter 242 ends with Todoroki being like, hey, Deku, Bakugo, you guys want to join my dad in the Hero Agency? I'm going to go practice Flashfire with him. And that leads into the Endeavor Hero Agency. So here's what I think the anime is going to do. It's restructuring the manga and what happens. I don't think it's going to skip over the My Villain Academia arc. God, I hope not. And I think next episode we'll see if that holds true. I don't think they're going to skip over it. What I think is going to happen is this. I'm going to predict this, and I could be totally wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. I hope this is how they end up doing it, because then I'll be like, okay, good, we're fine. I think what's going to happen is that next episode we're going to have the Christmas party, and everything's still happy and positive and fun. And it's like, oh, cool, My Hero Academia is still a good, positive, happy, upbeat show. And then they're going to have the Council of the Heroes meet to talk about stuff happening behind the scenes with the Meta Liberation, with stuff happening behind the scenes with the villains. Because the Meta Liberation Army isn't quite known. They're pretty secretive. And then we're going to show Redestro's backstory. It's going to tie the heroes talking about the villains and stuff is going to tie into Redestro. He's going to talk about the Meta Liberation Army, and then we're going to get into My Villain Academia. And after the My Villain Academia episodes, because back here at the Christmas party, Todoroki is going to preview that, and it will tie to this episode, because in this episode, Endeavor sees that Todoroki wants him to help. And so Todoroki is going to preview next episode where Todoroki's like, Bakugo, Deku, join me. Then we're going to take a break from that storyline, go through My Villain Academia, and then the season's going to end with tying back to the Endeavor arc. It's going to be like, hey, remember back in episode 12 when Bakugo said, hey, Todoroki, Deku, want to join me? Now we're going to tie back to that. That's what I think is going to happen. I think that they're not skipping My Villain Academia. We're still going to get a bunch of episodes on that arc, but we're sandwiching it. We're restructuring things in a different way. That's what I hope happens. After I thought about it, I was like, okay, I can see that's how they're doing this to make things pacing-wise smoother. Because that's the one thing with the last season that I think a lot of people complained about was the pacing. They're like, why are we doing 3 arcs in one season? Why is this happening and this happening? And last season kept very strict with the manga, and I think people complained because it seemed clunky. And I was fine with it because I was reading the manga, and I'm like, no, this is exactly how it happens in the manga. This is fine. But I think that for the sake of making the anime a smoother adaptation, this is how they're restructuring it. And I'm okay with that. As long as they don't my thing with manga to anime adaptations is when they exclude things. When they take parts of the manga out that are important to the plot and they just don't include them in the anime. I'm like, why did you do that? No. So I don't think that that's what they're doing. I think that they're just restructuring everything to make it flow smoother, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. I'm just like, there's 30 chapters you just skipped. There's like 30 chapters you just, or not 30, there's 20 chapters you just skipped over between episodes 11 and 12. What you doing? And I think it's because they're saving those for the second core entirely. Fine. Okay. Next episode's going to confirm that or not for me. So I said this episode, I'm like, oh, next episode we'll have a new OP and ED. We might not. Episode 12 or episode 13 might actually have the same OP and ED as this one. And then episode 14 through 25 is going to have the new one. That's probably going to be the case. And I'm okay with that. I'm fine. I just got panicked when I saw that they skipped so many chapters to go to the Christmas party. But after thinking about it, I'm like, okay, wait, no. They're just restructuring to have all the dark shit in the second half of this season and get all the lighter stuff here first. So yeah. Okay. I'm okay with this. I'm usually one person that's like, when you do a manga to anime adaptation, I want it kept strictly the same. But in this case, since it is Horikoshi pacing, I'm okay if the anime is trying to make it a more smoother, coherent narrative from start to finish of the season. I'm okay and I understand that. So next episode is going to be the point where we're like, okay, does this actually go down like it's supposed to? We shall see. So I'm going to remain optimistic, but I wanted to explain you guys my thoughts about that because I'm sure if you're a manga reader, you're like, what are we doing? And I think that's what we're doing. So if they skip My Villain Academia, I will riot, but I don't think they're going to because it's in Redestro. It's so integral to the plot. They can't skip it. They just can't. So that's going to be interesting, but yeah. Okay. I think if you're an anime-only person, you thought this episode was great. And I thought this episode was great, too. I'm just now a little... there's a twinge of me that's nervous going into the next episode to see what they do plot-wise with the show and how they're going to handle it. Because, to be honest, My Villain Academia is a very dark arc. It is very dark. There is murder. There is a lot of stuff going down that is very, like, dark and twisted. And I love it. Because it's taking My Hero Academia into a more mature place, and it's Horikoshi transitioning into a more mature tone. But I think that the anime is probably doing the wise decision and safely transitioning into that instead of just hard cutting, right? So next episode, Christmas time, before all the stuff goes down. So yeah, I'm gonna guess that when they have the hero meeting next episode, then they're gonna flash back to like 3 months prior and show everything that went down for My Villain Academia. That's what I think is going to happen. So I think they'll probably end next episode with talking about the city being destroyed from My Villain Academia arc, and then that's going to flash us back to how did this happen? And then we're going to find out through the arc. That's what I think is going to happen. I think that would be a smart decision. I just hope they don't skip Redestro's backstory because it's very, very important. So I've kept some panels of it next episode just in case, or in episode 14 just in case they do skip over it to talk with you all about it. But I don't think they're skipping it. I think they're just restructuring. So we shall see. But in any case, I hope you all had a wonderful week. I'm excited to hear your comments down below. Please no spoilers or tag spoilers. But overall, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, And I'll be back next week with episode 13 of My Hero Academia Season 5. Bye.